Well, it's really a pleasure to be here. I am actually, I had some of the comments, but I see the sign in the back. So for those of you who can't see the sign in the back, it says, I am Goddard. And I was talking to Ed Hoffman in the beginning, and it reminded me of my son is a recent graduate of Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. And when he joined, I started to do research. You know, he was interested in becoming a Virginia Tech student, and I did a little bit of research. Virginia Tech, I'm from Philadelphia area, Pennsylvania, so we know something about it, but not a lot. And the short version is they have this mascot called a Hokie, and I'm like, what's a Hokie? I don't know what a Hokie is, so I went online and I said, what's a Hokie? And it turns out about 70, 80 years, I forget the exact amount of time, somebody invented the name Hokie, and there actually is nothing called a Hokie. So when they join as a student, in their very first year, they give them a T-shirt, and it says, what's a Hokie on the front of it? Anybody from Virginia Tech here? Maybe you had to. Yeah, there's at least one. There's always one in this area. And it said, what's a Hokie? And on the back, it says, I am. And I see the sign in the back of Goddard, and it says, I am Goddard. And I think about that school and every school. I think about organizations or centers like Goddard, and I think about organizations like NASA, and then I think about really all organizations, and in the end, I'm always left with the same conclusion, and you'll probably hear me say it 2 or 3 more times today, that in the end, an organization is its people. So Virginia Tech and a Hokie, they are Virginia Tech, and I think Goddard is all of you, and I think NASA is all the people that work in NASA around the world, and those that work for you in all of your missions. So it's really unique to see that and be greeted so boldly by it, coming here to talk to you about project, program, and portfolio management, but to end up finding one of my main passions, which is around people more than even project and program management. So I'm going to get started. It's really odd. You can actually see yourself up here. It's a unique experience when you look over and you actually see your image on the screen. That's not me. I'm much younger than that. Used to be taller too. I'm not sure. So I just want to get started. So Chris did a great job of kind of setting up the main theme, Pulse of the Profession. And really what it is our annual study that we released earlier in the year. It's an important piece of research that we do. Thousands of participants in the study. We're researching trends and practices in project management, what organizations are doing, what's new and emerging, what's good practice and emerging practices around the profession. So first and foremost is our study, but this presentation actually is also focusing on integrating some other things, bringing context to that survey. So we actually look at other research of other organizations, and we'll talk a little bit about that, provide some context to our own research. This year, too, we've taken an additional step. We do this on an annual basis. That's why we call it an annual research report. But we also are doing in-depth studies around certain critical areas that are identified in that study. So we've already done 2, one on portfolio management, one on benefits realization, and we'll continue to do those through the year as we identify additional research topics, and then we will publish them as well, and they'll be available. And then we also want to look at examples, if you will, around, so not so much case studies, but stories of people struggling with or dealing with some of the same challenges or opportunities that we see in the research. I mentioned context. Context is a really important aspect of understanding research and practices in organizations, and there's context of the actual research, but there's also context of the macro business drivers in an organization. We've picked 3 to focus on. One is the slow economic growth that we see around the world, the uncertainty that comes from the economy. We hit the recession in late 2008, early 2009, the depth of it in the second quarter. We thought we were emerging from it, although reports around the world, Europe and the United States and elsewhere, is calling that into question now. We also know that there's a real shift in global market priorities in organizations. So before we used to talk about developed and developing economies. Now we're talking about emerging and mature economies. And it's causing organizations to step back and really focus on their practices. And these have impacts on project and program management and portfolio management. All of that really leads to a push for innovation. So there's a need in organizations to innovate. And too often organizations confuse innovation with invention. You're very familiar with invention. It's a very important part of your work. But innovation takes place in many ways. So there's business process innovation. There's financial model innovation, so margin analysis, supply chain, taking innovations out of there. There's overall operating innovation, operating model innovation. And the organizations are really focused on that as part of profitability on the private sector, but also delivering value for money on the public sector. And as they do that, it creates a real stress, if you will, and opportunity on project, program, and portfolio management. So I just want to focus on those three trends or macro trends just a little bit more. So this is, I think I talked about this a little bit in the PM Challenge. I mean, everybody loves a roller coaster. I used to think that. But when the roller coaster is the one that you see to the right of the actual roller coaster, it's not so much fun, right? So we started in the recession. This is actually 7 years of data. 2012 and 2013 are estimates. But you can see the big dip, and then it comes back up, and it seems to be improving, and it kind of wavers along. And I wouldn't be surprised if the economists globally make some revisions to estimates in 2012 and 2013 based on what's happening in the next couple quarters. But the point is that this uncertainty drives organizations and their business planning in a way that creates an impact to project and program management. What does it do? It does a couple things. The first thing it does is make it more difficult for organizations to grow. So there's less growth to go around for organizations, depending where you are. So if you're in India, China, things were going okay, 5-6% GDP growth, although we're starting to see revisions there. If you're in Western Europe, it was getting better. Now it looks even a little bit more dire. And the impact that it has is it's forcing organizations, both public and private sector, to be more effective at what they do. So if they're delivering programs and services and they're using project and program management, or on the operational side, they have to be more effective to compete to get their share of growth because there's less growth to go along. This is a graph that we used in addition to our Pulse of the Profession, we did an economic pulse survey. So we were asking our members a specific question. We said to them, what percentage of your projects or programs were canceled or delayed as a result of the economy? So it was specific to the economy. We started this in the first quarter of 2009, once the recession hit in 2008. And you can see, starting out at about 54%, peaked at 55%, gradually improving, and it just ticked back up at the end in the most recent quarter. So still a fair bit of uncertainty. So it's hard enough to deliver projects and programs in most environments. When you're in this environment from an economic standpoint, it forces organizations to kind of pull on strings that maybe change the game that the project or the context that the projects and programs are operating in. And that's true in both the private and the public sector. And then from the next macro business macro driver, we look at shifting market priorities. So organizations, traditionally you think about research and development, innovation. They typically had a single R&D center. If you go back 20, 25 years ago, single R&D center headquartered in the country of their incorporation. And there they did all the innovation, research and development for new products and services with a view to sell them in their initial markets, but also around the world. Now organizations are dealing with innovation in emerging markets. So the same markets that they looked for to develop products and services, maybe because the cost factor was lower, they're actually looking at those markets as the source of their greatest future growth, certainly in the private sector. So they're now building R&D centers in places around the world to develop products and services for those markets, rather than develop the products and services in those markets just to sell back to the mature markets that they already serve. And that's creating a different shift and focus for organization leaders in particular, and it puts a big impact on project and program management. How do you manage? We all talk about distributed teams, but how do you manage projects and programs in that environment where innovation and research is separated from manufacturing and production, and the actual markets that you're serving are different than the markets you served for the last 20 years. So that creates a stress on it. And then finally, when you think about slow economic growth and shifting market priorities, then there's a real push for innovation in organizations. And these studies, I should have said this in the last time, sorry, I mentioned earlier that we also look at other research and information. On the previous slide, all the three studies are repeated. So the one on the left of this graphic is our Global Dynamics of Innovation, so PMI study. The second one is an IBM study of CEOs. The third one is a PwC study. And the fourth one is Wipro out of India, their study. So we've looked at their research as well. And what it's telling us is around innovation is that organizations are now focused on innovation as a key element of differentiation. In order to compete, in order to grow, in order to serve new markets, they have to look to innovation. And I mentioned earlier, not just new product innovation. New products and services are critical, but it's also innovation in business process. You think about the Nano, the car from Tata Motors that was hailed several years back, $2,500, $3,000 equivalent US dollar car. The most significant innovation they had was in business process. I had the opportunity to be in London at the Innovation Awards of The Economist, and where they were presented, we actually presented the award to them for business process innovation. Most people think they invented a new car. What they did was innovate in the business process and with the ability to deliver a car at a cost of $2,500 to $3,000 US dollars around the world. Some facts that you might not know about that car is it's actually shipped as a kit to the dealers. They don't assemble it the traditional way. That's where the innovation took place. So slow economic growth, new markets, building products and services for that market, right? So they built that car for India, right? Those things are driving a real push for innovation. And in our Global Dynamics report, one of the things that we identified was that project, program, and portfolio management has to be able to shift and support that innovation, speed, agility, some things we'll talk about a little bit more. Make sure this. And then as we travel around, I mentioned we talk to other organizations. There's a lot of consensus around organization leaders. And there's also actually a convergence, and I want to talk about it because this is an important, I think, fact for this audience as well. So there's a real consensus around the need for back to the basics on project, program, and portfolio management, the fundamentals. I talked to a major supplier to industry and government around success and failures in projects. And what they told me, the head of their project delivery, the most senior person, we were in their executive conference room, and what he talked to me about was every time that we look at a project or program that fails, and we do the kind of look back, the lessons learned, and we say what went wrong, every time we do that, it ends up being something we already knew we should do. Right? So it's fundamental project, program, and portfolio management. Every time they look back, it's nothing they missed, it's nothing they didn't know about already, things they could have planned for and perhaps did, but yet it still failed because they needed to refocus on fundamental project, program, and portfolio management. And that's a critical area. The convergence is coming in the public sector, and this is different, and maybe not so much in the U.S. federal government. They've been a leader, and NASA's been a leader in project and program management, I think, largely heralded as a very mature organization. But around the world, governments are converging on the need to do good, sound, fundamental project management. I was in a meeting earlier in the year, actually twice this year in Europe, in the European Commission, focused on training and developing what they call functionaires. 25,000 of their civil servants in basic fundamental project management because that's what they do. I heard Chris say pretty much everything we do is new, right? We're constantly inventing and reinventing the way we do things. Well, many government services are really projects and programs because they're implementing a new system, implementing a new set of benefits, new value for money in terms of tax dollars spent. So we see that play out all over in terms of a need to get back to the fundamentals and to do more with less. So there are also the conversation that's typically taking place is, more revenue, less spending, more revenue, less spending. But there's a third leg to that stool, and that is efficiency. So I was actually really pleased to see the Efficiency Caucus formed on a bipartisan basis in April that we participated in Washington not too long ago, because that's really the third leg to the stool, right? So we can raise more taxes, revenue, however we do that. We can cut budgets, and there's a lot of austerity measures taking place here in the U.S. and all over the world. But there's a third part about doing more with less, right? So if you're going to have lower budgets, how do you get more efficient and effective? And project, program, and portfolio management, those three areas are critical to the efficiency leg of that stool. And governments everywhere around the world are starting to realize that. In India, they have a National Institute of Smart Government. They're talking about e-governance and e-government in a way that they've never done before. I mentioned the European Commission, a focus on training 25,000 functionaires, but also implementing standardized project management methods for the first time in a lot of the departments and agencies. We just met in the UK as well, and they have a similar focus. So that's one. And the other thing, which depends what organization you work in, is I think in the highly mature organizations, they recognize there is no silver bullet. The lower maturity organizations, those that are willing to, or hopefully trying to take, or I should say not take a shortcut, they still look for the elusive silver bullet. They think there's one thing they can do to get better at project and program management. Mature organizations recognize it doesn't exist. So the silver bullet, the good news is organizations are maturing and starting not to worry about or look for the silver bullet. They're putting in the hard work, standardization, methods, training, processes to mature the capability of project management in their organizations. And that's an important element as well. So consensus and convergence around those three areas. The easy answer is, why every organizations know that in order to do more with less, in order to be more effective, sound fundamental project management, core project management practices will bear fruit. And our study points that out. So this is a graphic from our Pulse of the Profession study. On the left-hand side, you see the average results of those projects that met their time, budget, and original goals and intent. So the study average was 64%. You can see that 12% of the budget is at risk on a study average. But as organizations moved up the left side in terms of success, less and less budget was at risk. So if you're thinking about the average budget size in that study was about $4 million. But if you're thinking about the budget size of some organizations, $50 million, $100 million, a single projects and programs, $1 billion, 12% is an enormous amount of money. You can do more with less if you can squeeze down the 12% that's at risk, potentially lost forever, and fund additional projects. And that's an important element from the study. Equally important is we stratified high-performing organizations in the study and low-performing. So low-performing were those that met 60% or fewer, met the time, budget, and the original goals and intent. Those organizations compared to high, who had 80% or more, risk 9 times more than the high-performing organizations. Low-performing organizations risk 9 times more. That's an astounding data point that came out of the survey, and it's being played out all over as we talk to government and private sector leaders in terms of what they're seeing in terms of the budget impact to a failed project or program, because many of these projects and programs now are of enormous budget size, and they span multiple years. In the case of public sector, multiple funding and leadership changes, and there's significant amount, 12%, but even more, 9 times, if you're the difference between a low performer and a high performer. So it's really a call to action for organizations to come to terms with investing in fundamental project program and portfolio management, doing the hard work around talent and training and development. Just to give you an idea, we also asked, what the difference in some of the high-performing versus low-performing organizations are. And not surprisingly, it has to do with talent management, right? So staffing the teams with the right project manager, not taking for granted that any individual in the organization can lead any project or program in the organization, taking the time to create a realistic implementation plan. So we're talking about fundamental project management. When I met with that executive of that large firm, we're talking about a $20 billion firm, and they sat there and said, everything we knew we should be doing, we didn't do on that project or program. So it's things as simple as creating realistic implementation plans. It sounds simple, but organizations aren't doing it. They're jumping over and taking maybe an easier path or a lower path of resistance. To me, probably the most significant one, in addition to the people, because it is, I always said, the best organizations I've worked in, when we were the highest performing, we had the highest people, period. You don't need to look for any other success factor. But the other success factor was critical is executive support. So high-performing organizations have significant advantage in executive support. Not just a signature on a paper that says, I approve this. We're talking about engaged executive support throughout the life of the project or program. That's a key differentiator between high-performing organizations and low-performing organizations, and we're going to take some looks at that as well. So all this adds up to the trends for 2012 that we're going to talk about a little bit. I mentioned the back to the basics, fundamental project management, but the business macro driver or macro business drivers. The one thing I want to say is it's really important to think about those macro drivers as related. If we look at any one, it's good, it's important, and we'll learn something. But when we think about them as related, slow economic growth means we have to look for new markets. So we're shifting our market focus and priorities, both of which lead to a demand for innovation, because we need to be able to innovate to stay competitive. Most leading organizations invest more in the downturn of the economic crisis to come out stronger against the competitors, right? And then if you're going to focus on new markets, you have to have innovation around new products and services that they'll actually value and buy in the private sector. Well, those related drive a level of organization strategy that's very different. So if you're going to have slower economic growth, you need to be more strategically focused. If you have less budget to go around, you need to be better and smarter in the choices that you make. So you need a greater strategic focus. Shifting market priorities, how do you take an organization that's done the same thing it's always done for the last decade and shift it? Well, you need to have some organization agility. And that is a very broad term and includes things like agile practices, but it's even more significant than that. And then finally, open systems. We talk about innovation and the drive for and push for innovation. Well, 2 decades ago, organizations innovated on their own. Sometime after that, they started to open up innovation to their supply chain partners or partners broadly, and they used to use them to say, hey, how can we solve these difficult problems and innovate, lower material costs, lower weight, those types of things. Now they're opening it up to their customers and their competitors, right? Because sometimes no longer do you get the sole source contract, especially in the public sector, they're sharing the contracts now. So how do you innovate in a partner? And that pushes really for an open system of innovation. All those push to really, there's one more, I'll push it up, to really the 5 trends that I wanted to talk about. One is a renewed focus on talent management. It's not going away. It's more important now than ever. Better portfolio management. We've watched project management profession mature from a focus on project management to include program management, and now organizations are recognizing they need a strategic focus different than the one they have relative to their portfolio of projects and programs. And that's driving a real focus and need and desire for better portfolio management. More use of agile practices, that's a piece of it. Organization agility. The better change in risk management. When you think about innovation and all that preceded it, leading organizations are much better at risk management, but also they implement and use change management practices throughout the life of the projects and programs. And then finally, the focus on success. And this is that convergence I mentioned earlier around private sector and public sector. We get asked more and more questions in the public sector around value for money. What they're really talking about is benefits. In the private sector, it's a little bit easier. Did we make money? In the public sector, it's a very difficult discussion unless the benefits are identified. So there's a real focus both in private and public sector still on benefits realization. We'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm just going to jump right into talent development because it's really critical. You can see here a couple sources of some other surveys. One's the Pulse, one's the Salary Survey. Focus on talent and the skill that project and program managers have as a critical success factor is enormous. But what skills are they talking about, right? So as you drill down a little bit, and over the last decade it's changed significantly. Everybody, I get a groan or two. I'm so disappointed, Ed. I didn't get a groan. Thank you, Ed. You were queued up to groan for me, Ed. And if not, one of my staff, Bob, groan. Usually I put this up because project management, no one wants to talk about the triple constraint anymore. But the reality is, when it comes to talent management, there's a new triple constraint. And organizations, especially in the private sector, have started this. The public sector is as well, and I'll give you a couple examples. So where before it was sound technical project management skills, schedule, work breakdown structure, all essential elements of fundamental project and program management, still essential. Don't discount them. It's a sound foundation that everything else has to be built on. But organizations are also looking, over the last decade, you start here at soft skills, leadership skills. What do they mean? Negotiation, communication, conflict resolution, all important aspects. But now they've entered into a third domain, what I call domain, which is strategic and business management. In the public sector, it's probably more commercial capability, right? So understanding the commercial aspects. Maybe that's the way to think of it. But in the private sector, it's, do you understand the organization's customer experience model? Do you understand their go-to-market strategy? Do you know how they're differentiating themselves in any of the markets that they serve? That's a very strategic discussion that's different than the one we had a decade ago on projects and programs. Because when all that changes, or if the top-level organization focus changes from a strategic or business management standpoint, as a project or program manager, how are you aware of it, number one, but then how does that impact your project and program, and what should you be communicating to that, hopefully, strong and engaged executive support? So it's a really different dynamic that's playing out. I want to give you a couple examples, one private, one public sector here. So the Cabinet Office in the UK is they actually undertook last year what they call Major Projects Authority. So they created this Major Projects Authority, MPA. They actually created a Major Projects Leadership Academy to take on some of that talent development that I mentioned. And when they set it up in 3 domain areas in the weighting that you see. So major project leadership, 50%, technical understanding, so sound fundamental technical project management, 25%, and commercial capability or strategic and business management, 25%. They've actually created this academy in the Saïd Business School in Oxford University. So they've actually gone out of the UK government, set it up in Oxford University, and they're going to put through their first series of cohorts about 150 people. They're not putting their project and program managers through it. They're putting their senior responsible owner, essentially the executive sponsors, through it first. So they're actually putting what they call the SRO, senior responsible owner, through the academy first so that they can be better executive sponsors. And then they'll come back and they'll put through the professional project and program managers. So it's a really interesting change in the public sector that mirrors the change that we're seeing in the private sector. So IBM, very well-known organization, largely considered one of the most mature project management organizations. If you ask anybody, they have a really mature approach to talent management, talent development, career paths, maturing competencies in their individuals. Just last year, they implemented a new level in their career path called delivery partners. And I talked to Steve Del Grosso, who's the director of the Center of Excellence, which is essentially their enterprise PMO. And I asked him, why did you do that? You're highly mature. You clearly have an idea over the last 15 years of what you were trying to accomplish. And he said, well, first you got to think about our projects like Smarter Planet type projects. More and more complex, all those things, new markets, lots of complexity around technology that they know or they don't know how they're going to use it. You think about the Watson computer, I'm sure that would fit in there as well. He said, so we have these projects, we identified a need for something different than we had in terms of the competencies and skills that we had identified. So I asked him, well, what are they that you identified? And he said, communication, negotiation, and organization change management. Right? So he said, they're the types of things we're looking for. And he goes, there's a second thing we did it as well, which is we want to be able to identify and recognize the best of the best. So by creating this delivery partner level, they actually identify what it takes to be part of it, and then those that actually can be part of it get the additional recognition of being one of the best in IBM. So it was really interesting to see that one of the most mature organizations is still focusing on maturing project management, especially around talent. And when you come to an organization like NASA, now this is where I don't pretend to know as much about NASA as everybody in this room, but one of the things I do know about NASA is that they face some of the same challenges from a talent management and talent gap standpoint that other organizations in the aerospace and defense industry, other mature industries like oil and gas. So you have this big bulge of very senior, very experienced leaders that someday are going to retire out of NASA, out of aerospace and defense contractors that serve NASA, out of other organizations. So from a talent gap, the broader talent gap issue, there's a need to focus on talent development. The good news is NASA was always early to recognize that, so there are things in place. I saw in a 2007 and a 2011 GAO study, and I love the way they're written. They never quite give you any accolades or commendations. They say something like, generally, NASA's talent management strategy supports its overall strategy. So generally being the superlative in GAO studies, I think. And then the other says that you do a good job of recruiting and developing and retaining the talent that you have. So in those two studies, I think there's a recognition that you've taken on a tough issue. But what I also know from dealing with some of the NASA executives is it's not enough, right? So you're still focused on talent development, talent management. How do you implement new ways to learn from each other? So in getting ready, I talked about, we talked with some of you about some of the things that are here at Goddard that you have going on. I was really excited to see that things like the Road to Mission Success course, which is critical in terms of organization learning. How do you get those most experienced project and program managers to mentor and share the knowledge that they have with the young generation? Because one of the things NASA does better than most organizations anywhere in the world is attract young, talented people. And they're incredibly bright. They have a great future, but they don't have nearly the experience and bruises or scars that some of the more senior people in the organization have. So how do you do that? So it's really interesting to see the organization take that on. You have learning plans, I think, required in all of your projects. You have a pause and learn sessions. I mean, I think that's a critical aspect of this organization learning. So talent development is not just, going to a course, log in the hours. Learning is a critical element of talent development, and it has to take place through the life of the project, which you do, and through the entire year and careers of project and program managers. So I think it's really an important example, and one that I plan to use as I go talk to other organizations around what they could do. Because I mentioned that high-performing, low-performing organization as a differentiation. So what we saw in high-performing organizations is that they're 3 times more likely to have a defined career path, and they're also twice as likely to have a process to mature project management competency. So it's not enough that you define the career, the jobs, the duties, the skills. It's not enough that you find people that meet those day one, but you actually have to have a process once they're there, that development aspect. And we know that organizations that do that are higher performing than the lower performing organizations because they do it twice as often as the low performing organizations. I mentioned earlier when I saw the I am Goddard sign, it really in the end it's all about the people, and I think it starts there with the talent management and the focus on the competencies and skills and developing them throughout their careers in the agency. This is a graph to come back to our own pulse of the profession research. So I mentioned the study average is 64%. So around the area of talent development, we identified a couple of the practices in the study that lead to it. I already mentioned 2 of them. The third is they tend to have certified project managers. In this case, we asked a specific question around PMP because it is obviously one of our certifications. But in addition to having a career path, a process to mature the competency, they also have qualification schemes where they are qualified to work on projects and programs. Remember, I went back to that example of getting the right person on the right project. That's all part of the qualification and certification scheme in many mature and high-performing organizations. So that's the talent management. I want to talk a little bit about portfolio management. It's another critical area for organizations. Like I said, most organizations now feel they do project management, although I would argue that many of them don't actually do project management, but they feel they do. They're starting to take on program management. I had a chance to go to an engineering and procurement construction company who actually won the project management award, and we had a lunch with their executive team afterwards, and I asked them a couple questions around what was kind of the hot topic in project and program management. So they gave me 2 answers. One was our PMO is very immature. We need some help maturing it. By the way, they just won a project management award. So I thought it was a pretty interesting response. And the other was, we don't know how to define program management. So as organizations have moved through defining project and program, they're now seeing a need to define or use better portfolio management, because we know that portfolio management is really a critical enabler to the other 2, project and program management. So when integrated all the way through to that top-level executive support, it's a real enabler to success. So portfolio management, I think of it in terms of investment and risk. Of course, reward on the investment. Any executive in an organization, that's what they're worried about. What am I investing in and what is my risk? How does that balance out across all my projects and programs? Am I going to be able to advance either the organization strategy, if I'm in the private sector, or the policies that we want to advance and the value that we want to deliver in the public sector? And that's a challenge, or I should say an area that remains constant no matter where you are in any organization. So we actually went out into the study, and next, this is one from the in-depth part of our study around portfolio management. We asked what project portfolio managers are routinely involved in, and you can see that you're talking about prioritizing projects and programs as a critical element, standardization, not surprisingly. I think in there, if I get which bullet it's competent portfolio governance and senior management receptivity as critical success factors. I mentioned that executive support. I can't play that up enough, emphasize it enough. If you don't have executive support, and I mean all the way through, projects and programs are going to be less successful or less likely to succeed. And that's a critical element in all projects and programs. Having mature PMO, we put that in there because a lot of times PMOs are increasingly being asked to play a role in portfolio management. They typically don't have the portfolio decision, but because they have all the information and data, they actually play a critical enabler role to the executives that maintain that portfolio decision. And I think that's a critical element. So as people start to build, organizations start to build PMOs, they need to consider that at the onset. Maybe they don't take it on in the very beginning, but they take it on later in terms of a role that they could play. I mentioned the Cabinet Office earlier, an example of portfolio management. I'm going to come back to that, but in a different way. So the Major Projects Authority was created in the United Kingdom to focus on, it turned out to be about 200 major projects the way they defined it. There's another 200 that fit into a different category. And their focus was on, obviously, getting more effective and efficient and delivering the value for money and not wasting money, because as in many areas of the world, some of their major projects were way behind and way over budget. One of the things they did, they hired an executive of the Major Projects Authority. He happens to come out of industry, so there's another trend actually that we see, but we didn't use here today, which is public sector is increasingly looking to the private sector for best practices and even talent, but that's an emerging trend right now. So they hired somebody outside of government, brought him in. His name's David Pitchford. I had a chance to meet with him in February, and I sat down with him and I said, you know, what was your challenge? He said, well, he got all of his department heads together, and he said, what's your portfolio of projects? And nobody could answer the question. They had no idea. Before they could get to the 200 and 400, they didn't even know how many projects or programs they had. They didn't have a way to define portfolio. They didn't have a strategy against which they were aligning projects and programs. So the very first task he gave every one of the department heads was, I want a portfolio, this is how we're going to define it. And from there they started to kind of carve it down to the major projects and then the secondary and tertiary sets of projects and programs. So portfolio management, largely something that you see in the private sector, now starting to be executed, and this is just one example. In the public sector, here's another public sector example. This gentleman, his name is Lambert van Nistelrooy. He is a member of the European Parliament. He's from the Netherlands. And he has a role in the multi-annual financial framework. You think of it as a budget for the European Commission for the next 5 years. And we had a chance to have a European parliamentary dinner, small group, hosted by Maria de Graça Carvalho, who's from Portugal. And he was there, and we started to have a discussion around projects and programs. It was very good. It was kind of more like a round table dinner. It was very informal. At the very end, he pushed his chair back and he said, how will we know if we've done all of our projects and programs, we've actually advanced what we wanted to advance in the European Union countries, the member countries? And then we started to talk about portfolio management and the need for a higher level strategy that didn't exist or wasn't documented anywhere in a way that they could say, we're actually moving the line forward in the areas that we want to move forward. And this is a public sector discussion. In the middle of trying to hammer out an innovation and research budget called Horizon 2020 and the overall multi-annual financial framework, they're starting to have portfolio discussions around advancing the agenda of the European Commission and its role in serving the member states. And I thought that was a very powerful statement and really related to the portfolio that we see in the private sector as well. Another quick example, Siemens, because this one I like because it comes back to talent management as well as portfolio management, the first two, and that is Siemens actually has a categorization system. So it's private sector. They categorize all their projects and programs, A to F, F being the kind of smaller, less complex. They also categorize all their talent, so all their project directors, that's the role they call it. And so they know who's qualified to work on what type of project or program. So they think of it as a matched set, if you will. So they use the portfolio of talent and the portfolio of projects and programs, and they match those, and they know where they have gaps, they know where they have to develop, and they know how and when they need to go out and find more resources. Or maybe not take on a project or program, which is another aspect of portfolio management, when not to do something. So it's really, I think, a very unique aspect where they've married two aspects of portfolio management, one on the talent side and one on the project. And then just quickly, back to our study for a second, and the only one I really want to focus on, you can see the study average to the left is the one under focusing, achieving strategic goals. There's a differential, those that use it frequently or often, and those that use it rarely or never. There's a difference of a delta of 20%, 70 to 50% in terms of the results that they have versus the study average. When you're talking about strategic goals, you're talking about alignment, and most often you're talking about portfolio management as a critical enabler of that. So it's really important aspect of what we came out, and that came out of the portfolio management in-depth study that we did after the original report. And we're back to the practices in the study, so what separates organizations in terms of portfolio management, 64% average. Of course, standardized project management, absolutely essential. Those that use portfolio management, 71% versus the 64%. I put PMO in here, not because, as I mentioned earlier, they actually take on the portfolio option, but think about it, there's only a 1% differential with those that have a PMO. But if the PMO took a role in enabling the portfolio decision, I imagine that might go up to the level of the other two. The next trend was around organization agility, and this one is a little bit briefer in terms of its impact. You hear a lot about agile practices and agile project management. Is it different than traditional project management? How the two, traditional, waterfall, agile? It's a great debate, but what organizations really are looking for is a way to get faster at everything they do. I attended the Care First Blue Cross Blue Shield PMO Summit in Baltimore last year, and there was a discussion after the presentation around agile practices and organization agility. And the conclusion of the executives there, of all the PMOs, was we will throw out anything that gets in the way of speed. So when we talk about agility, is we want to get rid of anything that stands in the way of speed. And that's different than agile practices. Clearly, they add to and can accelerate the work of organizations, but it's not a quid pro quo. It's not a one-for-one correlation. Lots of discussion. You can pick up the newspaper and read about any failed project you want, because they often make the newspaper, but the successful ones rarely make the newspaper. So what we did a couple years ago was study in the U.S. federal government successful programs to understand what were the common success factors in successful programs versus looking at those that weren't successful. And this is like a Twitter for the young professionals. This is kind of like a Twitter map, cloud, Twitter cloud, or heat map if you're older like me. But the larger the word, the more common the finding in terms of the study. And you can see a very resounding theme here being renewed in terms of this study. Successful programs, over 40 studies. They range from millions of dollars to billions of dollars, from 1 year to 5 year, and so on. Executive support, got to say it again, culture, communication, stakeholder engagement, and agility. The ability to change when things go wrong, because guess what? In projects and programs and management, things go wrong. They're estimates. There's risks. Sometimes they yield their ugly heads, and sometimes things go as planned. But when they don't go as planned, can you adjust? Can you be agile enough as an organization or within a project or program to make the adjustments and put in the mitigations and so on to get yourselves back on track? Organization agility is a critical aspect of that. I want to talk about this in a different way too. As we read through that study, and we released this at our last government forum we held in 2010, it was clear to me that what we're really describing in an organization is a culture of project management. And you can add project, program, and portfolio management to that. When you have executive support, you have a culture of communication, you have excellent stakeholder engagement, you're using risk management, change management, you're using all those things. What you've really done is create a culture of project management. And successful organizations are doing that. And those that I think are largely regarded as mature have implemented that project management. That's what I heard about. One other thing I read about in terms of Goddard and taking on that issue of organization silence. I think that was a critical, when I read that, I was kind of, this big light bulb went on in my head, because it came back to this study and I thought about culture of communication and silence as the enemy of communication. Right? So Jim Collins, well-known author, Good to Great, he used to say, good is the enemy of great. Well, silence is the enemy of communication, in my view. And I was thrilled to see that somebody was taking it on as an organization like Goddard was taking on so directly to say organization silence, is not acceptable. We need to have the capability to share what we know, when we know, as an organization, because that creates the culture of communication, that creates the culture of project program management, it creates organization learning, and it drives excellence. And I was really excited to be able to see that and read about the efforts that are being made here to deliver that, because it's an important aspect. And again, just coming back to the study, things around practices around organization agility, active sponsors. Give you a quick example: Middle East, major construction project. The king of Saudi Arabia said, I want the project 6 months earlier. They said, well, we have a schedule, we have a defined, King said, I want it 6 months earlier. So they went back. Innovation, agility. They said, what could we change to allow us to get to 6 months earlier? And they said, well, we have to get all these approvals. If you raise the approval limit and allow us to approve it, we can deliver it, because they take 3 months. You guys never come back. And of course, I'm translating it into American English. They said, you know, it takes 3 months to get an approval. If you just let us raise the limit and we can approve it within the project and program team, then we'll get it done. So they did. They raised the limit, one simple innovation. That's what we're talking about, organization, agility, and executive sponsorship, and the roles that people play in being effective. There's some things like that that don't cost a lot of money that create agility and success in projects and programs. Then change management and risk management. Just want to make sure the slide came up. It's another critical area. I mentioned a little bit about organization change management in the sense of talent management. So they're looking for that skill, if you will, or the ability to work in terms of organization change management. It has a direct impact on benefits realization. By the way, if we have organization change management, sometimes the project or program is done, but the recipient of the value of that project or program isn't ready for it. So that's a big challenge for organizations. But organizations that actually use these are much more successful. So the one I want to point to here is that about 80% of the high-performing organizations use change management, 84% use risk management. So in the study, I'd say almost all the high-performing organizations, remember those that are achieving 80% or more, are using change and risk management to help excel their project and program management capabilities. To give you an example, kind of private sector, kind of public sector related, I think it's, they're obviously a provider. Booz Allen Hamilton is a provider to many governments, including the U.S. federal government. They implemented a change management course with Georgetown University. So similar to the Major Projects Authority in the UK with Oxford, Booz Allen Hamilton implemented last year a curriculum on change management. It's taught half by professors and half by Booz Allen Hamilton executives or practitioners, if you will. It's focused on change management. The first cohorts went through about 500 total people. Are their actual practitioners, because they realized, as I mentioned earlier, if they're working on a major project or program, there's change management throughout, so that's critical. But there's also change management when it's delivered over to the ultimate agency, department, or if it's the private sector company. So they actually implemented this change management course with a focus on increasing the capability of their practitioners around change management. They're actually going to put through, after their full cohorts are done, they're actually going to put through executives or open it up to executives in government, because it's another critical aspect of sponsorship, if you will, in terms of your role of change management. And then finally, I think Georgetown has the ability after a period of time to open it up to the public. It's part of their executive education program, so it'll be available to anybody at some point. I just don't know the timing of it. But I thought it was a really interesting example of organizations embracing organization change management in the practice, but also in the client setting. And you can see the clear differentiation here between those that use risk and change management, much better results over the study average. And something I think for organizations to really focus in on as it gets more complex, as the push for innovation gets even greater, as supply chain customers are opened up to a much more global economy. I was interested, I was talking to the former chief executive of British Petroleum, and we talked about globalization, how it's kind of history, So if you remember Friedman's book, The World is Flat, everybody thought it was aha. Well, if you read the subtext, it was the history of globalization, so it already happened. But globalization still is transforming and changing, and organizations really don't understand it fully. So I was talking to the chief executive of Lord Brown's his name, and he's mentioned that on the FTSE, which is the UK stock exchange, 80% of the revenue of the companies listed on the FTSE is outside the United Kingdom. 80% of the revenue. So globalization is putting a dynamic very different than any of us really understand. I don't think the economist models have actually kept up. That's just a personal opinion, not a PMI opinion, by the way. But I don't think they've actually kept up. They're still figuring out how to make that make sense. But that's why organization risk management and change management is critical as you think about the globalization, supply chains, new markets, innovation, all the things that are creating challenges and opportunities for organizations. So finally, back to benefits realization. You can see the survey results. Value capture, benefits realization, strategic management are critical aspects from our portfolio management research. At the end of the day, I finally concluded that the value of every project and program is outside the project or program. Right? We're really good at tracking project metrics, performance metrics, program metrics, and we absolutely should, and we should get better at it because fundamental project program management is critical. But the value actually exists outside the project. So when we deliver that program, when you deliver that mission, the value comes after it's delivered. And to do that, you have to have a defined benefits realization plan. You have to know what the benefits are up front. In our model, we believe benefits should be defined up front. They should be assigned to various stakeholder groups. They should be tracked. There should be metrics. And you should monitor them post the delivery of a project or program. That's a critical challenge for organizations because they're not doing it now. And that's what our study found out. To give you an example, let's go to New Zealand. It's a beautiful country. I found a KPMG study when I was there. I was visiting with some government officials, and we pulled out a KPMG study to talk about the state of project management in New Zealand, and they were completely demoralized. I said, I know it looks bad, state of project management in New Zealand is not very good, but I have good news for you. It's not that good everywhere else either. And they said, really? I said, well, I think if you saw similar studies from other countries, you'd probably see similar results. Maybe not exact same percentages, but it's a challenge, especially in the public sector in New Zealand. And actually, this was actually public and private sector. But the thing I focused in on was 60% of the organizations failed to measure ROI, and they were astonished by that. They would say, how can we not measure benefits? How can we not measure the benefits of what we're doing and what we're delivering? But if you move down, I think it's the fifth bullet. I can't see it, but I think it's about the fifth bullet. They actually don't require business cases on all the projects and programs. So there's no chance you're going to get benefits realization measured and reported if you're not defining them up front or even using a business case. And that's what the focus, the renewed focus on benefits realization is causing organizations to do. They have less money, less budget, private sectors too. They need to focus on benefits, value for money, and how they do that is to implement those practices in organizations and integrate them into project management on the front end. There used to be a debate 10 years ago when I joined PMI around what point of the project do you actually engage the project manager. I thought it was a trick question. I said at the beginning of the project. They said no. Sometimes we do the business case. We don't include a project manager. We don't. All these organizations have these practices. I said no. You do it in the beginning. Well, same thing with benefits realization. You have to do it in the beginning. Do the hard work, the fundamentals, up front, and then measure throughout and ensure that they're delivered after the program or project is delivered. So it bears repeating from a pulse of the profession standpoint, from our own research, from the research of others, and from what we're seeing out there, that sound fundamental project management is critical. Those organizations that are high performing risk 9 times less than low performing. There used to be another discussion. How do you sell the value of project management? To me, that sells it right there. Right? The value of project management is we risk less. We waste less money and resources in projects and programs when we have excellent project and program management. And like I said, mature organizations, they recognize that. The executives recognize it. They're creating the structures, the career paths, the executive leadership to support it. But many organizations are still on that path towards maturity, and they have a lot to learn from organizations like NASA, from research like the Pulse of the Profession, and from global communities of practitioners all over the world. So I believe that's it. So thank you very much.